What we're going to do today, I never do this. You will notice this is the first time I've done it this semester. At most, I might do it like one other time in class. I don't like worksheets. Primarily, I don't like them because I have the same kind of associations with them that you most likely have, which is to say, it's an implement from grade school, and for that reason, I find them infantilizing. To translate all that, what I'm saying is, I feel like most of the time when you guys are given worksheets in class, you see it as like a way for the teacher to kind of waste time, chew up the clock. That's not what I'm doing. But I have those same associations, and again, that's why I don't like doing it. But, what are we talking about today? Well, I gave you a worksheet because to me, what I wanted to talk to you about, this is the best way I could think of to sort of organize that information, give you guys examples, have us think about it as a class. And we're just going to see what we do with our limited numbers. There's going to be a lot on you guys, basically. Cool. Okay. What this is, there are 10 sentences. There's one on the back. Okay. You have 10 sentences in front of you. These are all from the same student's paper. They are all from their first body paragraph. Okay? Like if you were to get rid of the numbers and put them all together, this is like the first half of their body paragraph, right? So what I mean is if you started from 1, you could read through to 10 and it would make sense. That may help you with what I'm going to ask you to do here in a minute. What we are doing today, I spoke of translations purposefully. I say that to you guys a lot. I ask you to do things like, hey, translate this. Hey, put this into your words. That's what we're doing. What you have in front of you, I think, is a really good example of a thing that basically all of you do to varying degrees. And that is this. All of you have one way of speaking, either to me or your friends, okay? I'm not saying those are exactly the same, but you have a way of speaking. You have a shelf in your mind of words and phrases that you're used to and you feel comfortable with. And there's another shelf, and it's much higher up. And for whatever reason, when it comes time to write a paper, you guys go to that shelf. And you knock stuff over, and you can't see what you're getting, and you kind of pull stuff down, and you're like, what is that? I don't know. And you put it in your paper, right? And it oftentimes gets you into trouble. I think that's what's happening here. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through these 10 sentences, and we're going to look for places, and we're going to practice ways to translate these problematic constructions, these places where the student has pulled stuff from that top shelf that, honest to God, sometimes doesn't make a whole lot of sense at all. We're going to make it make sense. All right. What else do I want to talk to you about? Oh, I guess I should say, I think the reason you guys do this, my theory is, and again, I'm a little ways out from grade school now, but I remember it. I worry you guys get rewarded for writing like this. I worry you guys get through high school sounding smart and like not saying much of anything, which is unfortunate. Because after you get out of high school, you do actually have to make sense to people. And so you're mistrained, and I'm sorry for that. But we're gonna try to fix it now. What I would do in a larger class, no shots fired, thank you guys. But in a larger class, I would group you guys up. That would make the workload a little easier. You notice there's only 2 of you. You know, Grace is technically not a student, right? She's our SI. So, how we're gonna break this up. You're gonna have 1 through 5. Heather, it is Heather, yeah? Mm-hmm. Sweet. You're gonna have 1 through 5. Mary, awesome. You're gonna have 6 through 10. Now, I'm not gonna just throw you guys into this. I'm gonna do an example from each one. We're gonna work through it as a class. So you're only gonna have 4 apiece, okay? To begin with, sentence number 5. Let's look at that. And before we jump into this, I'm gonna give you a couple pieces of advice. Number 1, you wanna look for any language that you get for free. And there's different ways this can come about, but you always wanna be thinking of like especially when we modify a noun or a verb, or especially when we like further define something, when we give more information about a thing. One of the questions you should ask is, well, do we need that definition? Do we know that already? Things like that. The other piece of advice I will give you, oftentimes, when you guys run into trouble going for that shelf I'm talking about, it's with verbs. You guys rightfully, for whatever reason, know that verbs are super important, especially in what we do. But because of that, you basically use the wrong damn word. You use incorrect verbs, and it's very funny, but very unfortunate when it comes to your grade. So, all right. So I'm going to read number 5, and we're going to talk about it. In the instance of which the men of these nations were captured by their enemies and held as prisoners of war, maintaining their masculinity was a priority to a certain set of ideals. Okay. Now, to help you out a little bit, I told you these sentences are sequential. The men the student is talking about here, if you go to number 4, you see they're talking about the Englishmen and the Germans. So we're talking about Vonnegut, and we're talking about those two groups of people when we say the men. Now I ask you, the big question, what could we cut and not lose anything from the sentence? Like, what language could we lose, but the sentence itself still makes complete sense? Do you think?
You cut to a certain set of ideals.
Why do you say that?
Because it already says they're a priority. Maintaining the masculinity was a priority. You just said that as a
Good. So the ideals we're talking about there are masculine ideals, right? Yeah. We're, for whatever reason, restating the thing we just said. Absolutely, you could cut that. I agree with that. Could end at priority, perhaps, right? Okay. Anything else you see like that? That we get for free is basically what's going on there, right? Oh, one quick point I want to make too. This sentence is a tense shift. We start speaking in the past tense. We want to stay in the present tense. So were should be are, was should be is. That's a small point, but it's going to help sometimes. Stay in present tense. Do we see any cuts we could make before the comma? That comma sort of cuts our sentence in half. Is there anything we could cut from the first half of the sentence and lose nothing? Talk to me about captured by their enemies and held as prisoners of war. Do we have a potential issue there?
Repetition, kind of.
It's redundant. It's even worse than being repetitive. But that's here nor there. Why do you say that?
Because if you're captured by your enemies, then you're automatically a prisoner.
You are also a prisoner. Yeah. We could lose either one of those. I don't really care which one. You could say either they're captured by their enemies, I can live with that, or you can say they're held as prisoners of war. Either one, right? But one of those has got to go, because they're the same thing. Good. Okay. Now before that, in the instance of which the men of these nations, can we lose anything there?
Nations,
Why do you say that?
because he already talks about how they're Englishmen and Germans.
We know that they're specifically from those places because we just said so. And even if we didn't, why do you think you could lose the men of these nations? Why could you lose that? It's easier than you think.
Because it doesn't say like what nation.
Well, because all it says is they're from a nation. Why could you lose that and not lose anything from the sentence?
It's not specific. It doesn't give you anything.
Well, because everyone is from a nation. If you want to say they're English and German, you can say that. And we do in sentence number 4, so maybe we don't have to. But everyone is from a nation. That's how it works. The men of these men, we know they're from nations. We know that. Okay. Lastly, I'll give you guys this one. In the instance of which, that's bananas. Nobody talks like that. I refuse to believe you guys talk like that. When. Cross all that out. In the instance of which, when. See how easy that is? It's the same thing. And by the way, again, this stupid shelf metaphor I'm going to keep using. You guys have all that language on your shelf. I'm sure you guys say when all the time. It's crazy how useful that is. When these men are captured, right? Look at everything we cut around what we actually wanted to say. We've lost nothing from this sentence. And again, we talked about how you can make a couple different choices sort of after that. Okay, so that's number 5. We're going to do one from the second set too. We're going to help out the second set crowd. Number 9. Billy Pilgrim's character is a true example of an American bearing horrible encounters on the war front, making him the embodiment of a war-damaged individual. There's a couple different ways to take this one, but I do think you can probably make some big cuts if you want to. What do you guys? What are some things you guys think we could lose? What's the subject here in this sentence? Billy Pilgrim, right? Okay. All you need for a sentence, and I'm not saying every sentence of yours has to be this simple, but all you need for a sentence, the shortest one in the English Bible, Jesus wept. You have a subject, you have a subject doing something. That's what a sentence is. It can be that short. So our subject is Billy Pilgrim. Now the question is, what is he doing here?
He's an example.
He's an example, okay? So he is something. If we can say whatever Billy Pilgrim is, first of all, I think we can all agree we can cut character, because he is one, and we know that, okay? But Billy Pilgrim is something. That is all we need.
He's a war-damaged individual.
Could say that. He's a war-damaged individual. I don't mind embodiment. I don't mind that. One thing you got to watch for in this exercise, and I do totally understand why you would do it, and I appreciate you doing it actually, but you do got to watch the machete a little bit. You can get so sort of into cutting, like some things can stay, you know? Some things there's wiggle room on, basically. But yeah, Billy Pilgrim is the embodiment of a war-damaged individual. First of all, that's awesome. That sounds kind of fancy. And it's much cleaner. That's basically what they were trying to say before the comma, right? They just figured it out. They said it in a really smart way. But the problem is they have all this stuff that gets in the way of that, right? All right. So we've taken care of number 5 and number 9. So as I said, I believe it was you. You're going to do 1 through 4. You're going to do 6, 7, 8, and 10. Okay?
So we're just cutting things and
Yeah, cut things. Sometimes you may have to cut and give us a word. The other thing I'll tell you guys, sometimes a verb is going to be wildly incorrect. Like it's just not going to be the right thing. You'll have to change that if you may have to look something up, like a word or two that they use, just to know why it's wrong, or maybe what they were trying to say instead. But yeah, give it your best shot. Mostly cutting things, and we'll see what we come up with. Take a couple minutes. Let's talk about it. What I'm going to do, as we sort of sort these out, is I'm going to type them up into a paragraph. Mostly just for illustrative purposes, but still, it's going to be up here while we're talking. So I've also shared this document with you. If you want to look at it on your own screen, it'll be there for you, but otherwise it's up here. Okay. To begin with, number 1. What'd you think?
Can I just read the sentence how
Okay, yeah, go kind of slow so we can follow your cuts, but yeah.
I said the stereotypes of war embrace the idea that one will require a heroic profile. However, the experiences of POWs speed differently.
Okay. Okay. So a couple things. Let's start right from the top. I think we'd all agree that we can keep this. Let's see, types.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't even know if we need that, but
Should it be singular?
I think we could. I mean, I'm not wildly invested in either one of those. That's fine. The first thing I have a question about. You kept a lot of that first bit. And my question, and it's kind of to you because you did this one, but it's for everybody. What is heroism? That's what we're talking about, right? Heroic profile, heroism, either one. What is that? If you were going to define heroism, how would you define it? If somebody didn't know what it meant. Like my 5-year-old, I'm defining things all the time for him. If you were going to sit down with him and say, here's what heroism is, how would you do that, do you think?
I don't know how exactly to describe it.
Give it a shot. We're feeling it out, man. But how would you begin to describe it?
Being brave.
Okay, that's part of it for sure.
Somewhat selflessness.
Yeah, well, those are qualities, right? Those are characteristics, absolutely. But heroism itself, like a dictionary definition, it's basically a sentence. You'd have to put together a sentence. So it's something involving those characteristics. But how would that sentence run, do you think? I'll put it to you this way. Heroism, or heroic profile if you like, that's a noun, okay? How would you define that noun for my 5-year-old? In a sentence. I'm just asking you to put it in a sentence. That's all I'm doing. Here, I'll write it up here for you. All you're saying is, it's something that we haven't figured out yet that involves, you mentioned bravery and selflessness, right? Okay, sure. What is it? We're talking about sentences today. We need a subject for this sentence. This is what the subject does. It involves these things, okay? What is heroism? If we're gonna, what kind of a thing is it, is basically what we're saying.
Person.
It's a person? Heroism?
Action.
Well, it's defined by actions, but heroism is not an action, right? What is it? When you say involves bravery, you're saying it involves actions of bravery or selflessness, right? Heroism itself is not an action. You have heroic acts, right?
Is it like an intention?
What do you mean by that?
Like people have intentions to be.
Yeah, but again, you're saying those people have them. That's not, heroism itself is not an intention. I said it's a noun. What are nouns?
The characteristic.
No, I mean like elementary school definition. What's a noun?
Person, place, or thing.
Person, place, thing, or there's a fourth one. They do teach it. They don't teach it all the time. They're failing you guys at every turn. Or an idea. It gets lumped into things sometimes. Person, place, thing, or an idea. That's a noun. Heroism is an idea. We have an idea of what a hero should be. And it involves bravery or selflessness. Sometimes robotic arms, whatever, right? But we have an idea. Why might that be important in this first sentence?
Because the stereotype is kind of the idea or something.
It is. Well, and we also say, embrace that idea that we're talking about ideas already. And if we're thinking about how we get certain things for free, do we need to basically talk about idea and heroism if heroism itself is an idea? Do you see what I'm saying? So we can make this much simpler.
So you're saying the stereotype is being a hero?
The stereotypes involves being a hero, right? Which is what they're saying.
So the
But all that business about an idea, we don't need that.
the stereotype of war embraces that one will require a heroic response.
We can get even simpler. So anytime, part of their issue is the verb. That's not a good verb. It sounds fancy. Again, it's that shelf. Embraces, what does that mean? That's a really fancy way of saying what? You embrace something. What?
Accepts?
Yeah. I was gonna make it even simpler. I was gonna say hug. That's all you're saying, right? But accepting, right? Yeah. But when you make it simpler, you recognize that that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So again, the stereotype of war involves right? That's all we are saying there. Embrace sets us on a bad path, but then all that business about that idea, that one, anytime you have multiple, I'm going to call them articles. That's those little bits of language that connect things, so they're not nouns, they're not verbs. This is going to be a super nerdy day, by the way, I apologize. But there's good reason for it. But those small articles like that, or the, or of, that connect bigger bits of language, if you get multiple ones of those cropping up together, a lot of the time, that's a good signal that you have unnecessary language. We get two that's really close together. That's a signal that we fucked up. That's what that means. So the stereotypes of war involve heroism. Cool. We need a semicolon because of what we've done, but that's okay. However, they say, and then you cut the physical appearances thing.
I just kept the experiences of POWs feed differently.
Okay. Maybe. And look, again, this is one of those wiggle room things. On the one hand, you can cut physical appearances. I get that. On the other hand, you can keep it. It depends on how specific they get in the paragraph. Like if the whole paragraph basically ends up being about physical appearances, I would probably keep it. But it's weird talking this loudly to just you, by the way. But if not, then I would say cut it, right? So that depends.
Should I include the novel part?
No. Why not?
Because we're already talking about the novel.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, well, you can make the case.
It would be redundant. 'Cause if
It would be.
We're talking about the novel and then we say the experience of the POWs in the novel.
Yeah. I mean, again, I would argue there's wiggle room there because if you don't have it, you run the risk of saying all POWs, right? So I can take it or leave it. And it also kind of depends on what the rest of the paragraph does. If they talk about other POWs, then I would absolutely say lose it.
Like if they specify.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. Okay, so let's get some of that typed up. However, just to be safe, I'm going to keep it, but you could potentially cut that. And again, because we don't know quite what they're going to do. My question, and the first class did this too, this is a great example because you glossed over this tells me you could fall prey to this as well. Feed differently. That's a verb you guys have access to. I know you know what it means to feed something, right? You give food to. That's what it means. That does not work here.
Could I say differ?
Sure. Why?
It's just a simpler way to say that the experiences of POWs were different from the stereotypes of war.
That's what they're trying to say, right? But again, they dress it up. They give us a verb, which is incorrect, but they give us a verb that necessitates an adverb. That's what differently is. It's modifying that verb. But you cut right to the quick. You're like, well, they're trying to say it's different. That's what they want to say. Just give us a verb that says that. Yeah, that's great. I mean, if you want to be super specific, you say something like this. I mean, But either way, absolutely that verb fixes all kinds of problems. Good. All right, number 2.
I cut out wide-ranging and relentless.
The adjectives. Yeah. So again, for those keeping score at home, adjectives and adverbs. That's the language that modifies nouns and verbs. I'm not saying you never need them, but you almost never need them.
Sometimes it just makes like a mouthful of a sentence doesn't need to be.
It makes it hard to say, which is, again, a good indicator that you fucked up.
And hard to process.
Yeah. Well, good. It's always handing more information to the reader. Yeah, and again, sometimes you do need it. For instance, here in a bit, we're going to talk about Englishmen, we're going to talk about German soldiers. Depending on what you're saying, we might need those adjectives, right? We might need to know which soldier you're talking about. That makes sense. Wide-ranging ignorance, relentless pride might be important sometimes, but here, yeah, it just kind of seems like filler, and it kind of gets in the way. It does. First of all, I hardcore disagree with notions. I'm not saying you can't say that, but that's not the point they're making. They're saying Vonnegut says, and again they're trying to dress that up. So I've dressed it up a little bit for them with argues. But anytime you want to say says or states, you guys really love a good states because it's like says but with a hat on, like it's a little fancier. You can say argues, illustrates, underscores, points out, emphasizes. I'm a human thesaurus, but you have access to one. You know what I'm saying? Like if you want to do that, you can. Notions ain't it. That's a synonym for an idea, right? Ideas is what they're saying. Vonnegut argues that war I'm not super in love with that, but it does make sense. I can understand it. And then from there you said derives from ignorance and pride. Is that what you did?
I can't just, well, I don't know about the stupidity part.
Okay. Well, and again, there is going to be wiggle room in some of this. I hope we could all agree that you could lose those adjectives now. As far as that list is concerned, ignorance, stupidity, and pride.
I would think agree.
Yeah, the question becomes, do you need all 3?
2 suffices.
It does. Very fancy verb. You can keep all 3 if you want. You could lose 1 or 2. But yeah, either way, that whole section could be trimmed. And that would kind of be up to the student here. But for the sake of us moving on, we'll leave it at 2. That's fine. All right. Number 3. This one is tricky.
I don't think that certainties really means what they're trying to explain.
What are they trying to explain? I'm wildly curious.
I said I replace certainties with ideas.
Okay.
Images, something like that.
Yeah. Well, all right. So here, part of why you're struggling is exactly why you're giving us the options you're giving us. Basically, the sentence itself is pretty short, right? Compared to the other sentences on this worksheet, you're like, damn, there's not a lot to cut there. So, okay. And number 2, absurd and complex certainties, I don't know what that means. Like, I know what it means grammatically, but I don't know what it's referring to. What certainty? What complex certainty are we talking about? I don't know. And that's why you say maybe ideas, maybe images. Because even then I'm like, well, what ideas? What images? Because they haven't told us, right? So you can't know. So what I'm going to have to do for us is just say something. What did I say? Illustrated. Some kind of an idea. I agree. I don't know what it is. We could maybe infer based on the other sentences, but we're not in their head, so we don't know. And the other point I want to stress to you here is, understand everything we're doing right now, all this translation work, is what I do when I encounter this in your paper, like in my head. And if there's any moment when I'm reading your work and I'm like, something, I don't know what, that's a problem, right? You want me to know what it is you're trying to say. So that's an issue. Okay. Next sentence. What do you got?
The Englishmen show an alternate vision of manliness in contrast with Germans, who are similarly broken and battered.
You made some interesting cuts there. So the first one, actually, I want to go all the way to the end. You cut, keep on pursuing the war. Why did you cut that?
The Englishmen are POWs,
So
they can't pursue the war.
good. Yeah, I mean, and again, just so we're clear, the point, and this is actually a bigger problem with the sentence, but what they're saying is, and once you trim it, it gets a little easier to see. The Englishmen are somehow, I think they mean an alternate version. Technically, you could say vision there, but honestly, I think they mean version. The Englishmen are like this alternate version of manliness, contrasted to the Germans, but they're saying they're an alternate version because the Germans pursue war. Now, the point you've made, which is a fair one, is that the Englishmen don't have a choice. They can't pursue war because they are captured. That's how that works. Well, then that means the whole idea of this sentence kind of falls apart, right? They're not contrasted, at least not in that way. So that's a bit of a problem. What I would say here is, I would put it like this. Number one, again, I think we run into this issue because we've tricked ourselves. That's the point I'm going to make again and again today, is when you dress up your language like this, even you don't know what you're saying. Like, I know this student. She's actually really smart. She has really good ideas in class. I know she doesn't think this once you spell it out like that. But all that language that you cut gets in the way even when you're reading this, when you're writing this. So that's a problem. To make it much simpler, as you began to do, the Englishman, I mean, again, we could have a better verb, but an alternate
Versions of it.
version of manliness. See, they're getting weird with radiates. I don't know what cause an organization necessarily
I
means.
just said in contrast with the Germans.
I can live with that. Contrast with the Germans.
Who are similarly broken, because however doesn't really make sense.
And then whatever this is going to be what that contrast is. Because it ain't pursuing the war. And we've talked about why, right? And again, we're at a place as the reader, because I don't have you there to explain what you meant. Once I reach this stage in my head, again, I don't know what they wanted to say. We've arrived at another something. We just can't know. One idea I have, and then we'll move on, is like maybe they contrast with the Germans because the Englishmen are super cool. Do you know what I mean? That whole bit about how they make war look cool. They're ripped to shreds because all they do is exercise and play games and put on plays. Do I know?
The Germans kind of look up to them.
They idolize them in a way, right? So like this alternate version of manliness she's talking about, it's like a Hollywood version maybe, or like a movie version, maybe. And you could perhaps talk about what that has to do with the Germans, maybe the fact that they idolize them, something like that. But again, we don't allow ourselves to do that given the way we've built the sentence, right? We get in our own way. But maybe. Okay. So you're off the hook now. Very good. And I guess I'll put another note there. So if I were revising, if this were my work and I was going back, the first two things I would have to figure out, right, are these two somethings. That's a big problem. And I would do that now. Now I would know. All right. Your time to shine, Mary. No pressure. Number 6.
Can we just read it how I cut it?
And that's fine. When you do, like I told Heather, just go a little slow so we can follow your edits.
Okay. Americans were mocked by the British for possessing little integrity.
Oh, wow. That's a a lot of cuts. Okay, let's start with that first one. So, oh, and to be clear, again, we want to stay present tense. I know that this student shifts tenses, so it would be Americans are.
Okay.
But either way, Americans are mocked. Why'd you cut being?
I just felt like it sounded better as like Americans were mocked by the British.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm kind of curious if you know why. It's fine if you don't. I do.
I feel like it was just like,
Those two verbs.
It
I
is.
feel like it was just excessive.
Well, it's excessive, as Heather points out. It's two verbs. I'm not going to say there's never a time you can't use two verbs, because there probably is, and I'm not thinking of it. But there's almost never a time when you need two verbs. I mean, look at it. What's the verb we want? What are we actually talking about? We're talking about the fact that they're mocked. So just do that. Americans are mocked by the British for possessing little integrity. I'm going to type that up. I'm curious about the last bit. In the state of their current situation. Why'd you cut all that?
I felt like it wasn't specific enough. Like, he could have like made it specific by saying like during the war. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, because, like, current situation is wildly unspecific.
Like, what is the situation that they're in?
Well, yeah, so, like, you guys are in a current situation, and though you may feel like prisoners, it's pretty fucking different, right? From these guys in their current situation. Yeah, if we were to keep it, we would at the very least need to very much redefine it. Possessing little integrity.
Did you say despite their current situation?
Well, no, even then I would want to know what that situation is, I
Yeah.
think.
I just said during the war if I were to put something there, but I don't really know
Yeah.
if it's accurate enough.
That's better. That's a lot better. Little integrity. I don't know. Because that gets at the fact that they're POWs without saying POWs again.
Yeah.
You could also not have it. Again, there's going to be wiggle room in a lot of these, but cool. Okay. Number 7 and 8 are really tricky because they have quotations actually. So I'm curious to see how you did there.
Okay, so I said the British are not valid illustrations of the shred of propriety as their view of survival was in the quote.
Okay. So you made some edits that I definitely agree with. We'll start there. So you cut by Vonnegut. Why?
Because he already cites Vonnegut after the quote.
Yeah. And so according to like MLA, you don't have to do it. But even in terms of syntax, right? What we're doing, making sense, you don't need Vonnegut. Do you know why?
We're talking about the book.
We're talking about the book. When we say the British, we mean the British in the book. We know that it's by Vonnegut because his name is on the cover, right? Yeah. So you don't need it. Good. Some of the other...
There was something I was confused about.
Sure.
I just didn't like of the shred of propriety.
Why?
I didn't know what to change it to.
Okay. Well, one issue there, again, it's an earlier issue I pointed out with the that's. You have all these articles, of, the, and of, right? Oftentimes when you have a preponderance of articles, when you have a bunch of articles showing up all together, it's a really good sign that you screwed up. What does propriety even mean?
I don't know.
Ah,
I already looked at it.
what does it mean?
The state or quality of conforming to conventionally accepted standards of behaviors or morals.
Being proper is what we're talking about. We talk about propriety. So for instance, I've used the fuck word several times in this class already. According to standards of propriety, especially as like an authority figure, isn't that wild? I'm an authority figure right now. That doesn't really fit with those standards. I should probably dress a little differently as well. So what I'm curious about And this is going to sidestep the issue because number one, I agree, of the shred of propriety, especially shred, again, they're trying to sound like almost poetic there, like they're trying to reach for that shelf. I don't mind talking about propriety, but what are we saying? We're saying the British are not valid illustrations of propriety because their view of survival is this, right? That's what we're saying. Let's type that up first. That's good enough. My question, though, again, I think we have a bigger problem. We're saying they're not valid illustrations of propriety, of being proper. And to support that, in the quotation we say, if you stop taking pride in your appearance, you will very soon die.
That doesn't make sense.
Why not?
It doesn't explain what Vonnegutt's meaning.
Well, they're trying to, but again, there's a higher level problem here. Why do you say it doesn't make sense?
The proper thing, I suppose, the proper thing is
Yeah.
to take pride in your appearance and maintain it.
Yeah,
And they're saying that they're not illustrating that, although they are.
they are. Exactly. And again, I think why, or rather how we end up doing that, you notice all the cuts we make if you're following along on the stupid ass worksheet. All that language, you have to carry it in your head too when you're writing, when you're building the thing. I think they get lost. I think they totally lose the thread of whatever the hell they actually wanted to say, and then they just put the quotation in, and they're like, I guess it's fine, and they just move on. So yeah, the problem is that they are valid illustrations, and I mean at this point, that's redundant, so you just say, they are illustrations of propriety, because their view of survival is that propriety, to appear proper, is life and death. Yeah. Now what's cool about that is that's wildly interesting. The fact that Vonnegut would pose these characters like that. We don't talk about that because we couldn't, because we wrote the sentence the way that we did. But now, as I'm editing my work, right, I'm going back and I'm looking at things, I need to absolutely talk about that. What does it mean for Vonnegut to not just have these characters in the book and they're exemplars of masculinity in the ways that we've talked about a little bit up to this point, but also that they're so concerned with propriety, that appearing proper, that they argue is life and death. That's ridiculous. Because we're in a war. We're actually faced with life and death. They're like, no, man, you need to dress correctly. That's the real war. So we can talk about that. All right, where are we at? 8, I think?
Mhm.
8. What'd you come up with? This one's hard.
Yeah. Okay, so I said Jarvis implements how Vonnegut investigates World War II through Harvey Body's stating in the book.
Very brave of you to take that on. There's a couple issues. And the biggest one is one that, whether you realize it or not, you did not attempt. And again, I totally understand why. Talk to me about the quotation. Do you see a problem in that quotation? There's a pretty big problem in what we're quoting from Jarvis here.
Did they really connect it to what their thought? Did they really connect like the quote to what you were saying?
That's what I was thinking. It didn't really say anything about dehumanizing. It just said Harvey Bodies.
Like I see how they could use it, but I don't see the thought they're following.
Okay. I think I see what you guys are saying. All right. Well, we can start to get there. The first thing we got to do is fix the quotation. And here's what I mean. I went ahead and typed in the quotations because we can't really change those very much because we were just quoting, right? What the hell is this? What is it? Like, what is it? What is the it there? I have a guess, but I'm not sure.
But they don't tell you,
Exactly. I don't know.
they need to specify it.
I think they mean Vonnegut, like the story, Slaughterhouse-Five, but I'm not positive because they don't tell me. And what's more important, we don't need. Try again. We don't need any of this.
Is that what we were doing?
That's what we want to talk about, right? Vonnegut, sure, I could see how the story is somehow an examination of the dehumanizing lens through which bodies are viewed during war. I can see that. Okay, cool. So now the rest of the sentence, what we have of it anyway. You said, if I get this right, Jarvis, I'm going to quibble with that verb. Implements is not what they want. We can be simpler. We can say describes, if you like, something like that. There's different ways to go about that. She describes okay? Much simpler. Again, she describes Vonnegut's depiction of World War II. And then what was the rest of it you had?
Through harmed bodies stating.
Okay, okay. Well, because we trimmed the quotation, we've got to make it make sense now. There. That's it. So we're saying Jarvis describes Vonnegut's book, right? That's what that means. This is a little weird, but we can live with it right now. She describes it, thinking about that, as this, right? So we're basically saying the way he talks about bodies helps us understand that war dehumanizes people and views them as bodies. That's what we're saying. We got all that stuff out of the way. Now we can see it much more clearly. Good. All right, we're almost done. I know this is boring. Imagine reading 100 of these. All right. Lost my sheet.
We already did number 9.
Yes, we did. Well remembered. Well, it's right there, right? He is the embodiment of a war-damaged individual. Sweet. One more. One more. What do you have?
Well, I don't know how to say this word, the red
What they meant.
and I looked it up and it didn't really.
Well, they didn't spell it correctly.
Okay.
What they meant was re-territorialized. And that is a verb, and it's a really good one. It's very fancy. So fancy, in fact, that when I type it, Google will not recognize it. But it's a real word. You don't say it very much. But they misspelled it because it's just long. And again, have you ever said that before in your life? Probably not. So they messed up. But I like that verb, and we may talk about that. The rest, though, what'd you come up with?
So then Jarvis notes how war requires bodies, and we could see how war re-territorialized Billy's body, giving drastic physical and mental changes.
Okay.
But I said maybe to cut physical and mental.
Well, I mean, I don't mind those. I mean, really, my biggest issue with the end of the sentence is changes. Because I just don't think that's specific enough. Like when we're talking about Billy, and we're talking about how bodies are treated in the book, physically and mentally, what does Billy look like after the war? You could say that he changes, but what kind of changes, I guess?
Beaten up now.
Yeah. And again, that's much more, that's a kind of a change, but it's much more, he's damaged, he's broken or beaten or whatever you like, right?
Drastic physical and mental damages.
damage. But yeah. That works. Okay, so a small point before we, Jarvis notes that war requires bodies. If I can type.
And I said maybe take out and just put like a comma.
Well, okay, here's the real problem, and you guys may not know this one, so I'm just gonna give it to you. Leave us out. By us, I mean us. We, I, the reader, any of that, leave it out. Because, number one, hopefully, I can assume you've read the book. I just do that. When you're writing about the book, I assume you've read it. And number two, really the reason you want to leave that stuff out is it leads to unnecessary language. If you cut, we could visually see, do you lose anything? No. Right? We don't need that for the sentence to work. So, and again, there's a couple different ways to do this, but she notes that war, did I do required? Google try to help me. Requires bodies. That's what I get for doing this, sitting sideways. And how war I spelled that right. Right? Yeah. Re-territorialized Billy's body. Cool. All right. So we have a couple holes to fill that we found, by the way. We found those doing this. We didn't know they were there. I'll know they're there when I'm grading. Not to get scary, but you know. And the other thing we did, I'll tell you guys this now. I chose this draft for today for two reasons. Number one is the reason I gave you at the top of class. All of you do this. It's not always as pronounced as it was in this draft, but all of you, to varying degrees, engage in this top shelf sort of, I throw my hands up every time I see it in your papers, what the hell are you doing stuff. You all do this. And we've talked a little bit about why I think you do it. And I am sorry that you were taught to do it. I can't help that. But we can try to stop. Number two, the other reason I chose it. This student hit me up over the weekend and she said, look, I'm really worried about my rough draft. I think it's too long. She said it's like 5 or 6 pages and she wants to add more. That is a problem. That is too long, okay? But if her entire paper is written like this, which it pretty much is, you see what we cut. I'm gonna go ahead and say like at least a page of her paper, like once you trim it all, is probably gonna go away. And that's wild to think about. You know what I'm saying? You could lose a whole page of your work and lose nothing. That's a problem. That's a lot of filler that you don't mean. I know when, by the way, I know when you guys intentionally put in filler. Let's make that very clear. But even when you don't mean to, if it's a whole page, that's rough. Because I'll be real with you, I get really annoyed with a page of filler. And so for that other concern that she has, and I know some of you are like, well, I should be so lucky to be worried about my paper being too long. But if you have that concern, and you can, especially on this paper, this could be part of the problem. It's just all this unnecessary language. And the upshot is once you correct in the ways that we have, it just makes so much more sense. Like it's so much easier to follow what this person is trying to say, which is your job. You want me to understand you, right? So don't, to the best of your ability, stop reaching for that shelf. I'm not saying you can't ever do it, but do it way less often than you do. And just talk to me like a human being. You guys talked to me in class. I understood you the whole time. Wasn't that wild? Do it in your papers. Just talk to me like that, okay? I'm only stressing it because this is a real problem. and it kills me. Okay. With a little bit of time we have left in class, I'm going to turn this off. Do you guys have any questions, either with what we talked about today, or about the paper itself, or anything like that? Anything at all? I will take that as a resounding no. Okay. All right. We'll have a few more things to talk at you about, and then I'll just let you go. First of all, I shared the document with you, like I said at the top of class. So if you do, for whatever reason, want to refer back to what we did today, it's all right there. The link is in the email I sent you. You click on it, you'll be able to pull this up. It's right there, okay? What else? Oh, peer review, due on the 14th. I realized at the end of last class that I forgot to post the questions for that. I will do that immediately after this class. The reason for that is the peer review is due on the 14th. The other note I have about that, I think the way Turnitin works is it won't let you do a peer review if you haven't, if you didn't get a rough draft in by the due date or whatever, okay? I'm still figuring this stuff. I've never done a peer review before through Turnitin, but because of the way this semester is, I'm trying it. And there's weird hoops to it. So we're just gonna see how that one goes. But if we're able to do it, it will be due on the 14th, okay? And that's on Turnitin. Also, your second paper is due this Saturday. I hope that's not a surprise. Okay. None of you look shocked, so that's good. The last thing I want to tell you, next week, okay, your second papers are due this Saturday. That means our third and final unit starts next week, okay? For next week, before you come into class, you have to have watched Die Hard. Has anybody ever seen this before? Awesome. The first one? Excellent. It's an 80s action movie. I think it's both wildly entertaining and ridiculous. But that's also why it's entertaining. The two things I want to say to you. Number one, the reason I chose it, because there's a very real possibility when you sit down to watch it, like Grace, you said you haven't seen it, right? I know you at least a little bit. I don't know you guys like I know Grace, so it's okay. But I know you at least a little bit. I know when you sit down and watch it, about 20 or 30 minutes in, you'll be like, what the fuck? Why are we watching this? And that's awesome. But for all of that, especially if you can think about this a little bit while you're watching it, if you keep in mind some of the conversations we've had about this book or about Fairchild and the concerns that these people, these characters have, watching Die Hard, some things are going to stand out to you, potentially. And I like it too because it is such a Hollywood 80s action movie. Shouldn't be anything to it, right? Like, what could you possibly talk about with a movie like this? A whole lot of things, actually. The second reason I assigned it is because it's fun. I think it's nice at the end of the semester just to have kind of a slightly less serious thing to look at and talk about, potentially be entertained by. I know many of you weren't entertained by this book. I was, but you're not me, so there's that. Lastly, I purposely say you have to watch Die Hard. I'm not saying you have to buy it, okay? You need to be able to watch it once or twice. Once before class, next week, okay? You need to sit down and watch it. It's like an hour and a half, whatever movie, okay? And then potentially one more time after that at some point. You have to be able to watch it. But it's on different streaming services, I believe. You know, I've had students in the past like rent it. I think on Amazon you can rent it for like $1 or $2. It's 2020. There's all kinds of ways to watch a movie, is what I'm saying. If you end up buying it, I would at least look around because it is old. You can get a cheap copy. But look around a little bit. Sometime this week, do some light Googling and figure out a way that you're going to watch it, right? Okay, that's all I got. Everybody good? Sweet. I'll see you in a week.